Hello, everyone. Welcome to Technical Takeoff or Tech Takeoff. My name is Matt Call. I'm a product manager on the Microsoft Intune team, and I'm responsible for Windows security, among some other things. I'm joined today by two other fantastic individuals, Eric and Laura. Eric, do you want to do a brief introduction?
Yes, hi, thanks, Matt. My name's Eric Schreiber. I'm a group engineering manager in the Intune product. I work on EPM with Matt. Great to see you all. Thank you for coming.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Aritza. I'm a product manager on the Microsoft Intune team, working in security management.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura and Eric. Let me cover real briefly what we're going to go into today, and then we'll get right to it. So today's session is going to be all about protecting those user accounts on your devices, right? There's two sets of user accounts that we're going to be talking about today. First is the end users actually running as standard user, or hopefully not as admin on your devices, as well as those built-in accounts that need to be managed to make sure that we protect those the same way that we protect our regular users or our corporate user accounts. We'll be talking about using EPM and giving just enough access to those users to make sure that they can complete the tasks that they need to complete without needing to be full-blown admins on the device. And then Eric is going to talk a little bit about our new support approved scenario and how that's going to help facilitate your end users requesting for an app to run elevated or a binary to run elevated just for a limited period of time. Then we're going to switch gears a little bit, and Laura is going to talk about how to use LAPs to support those built-in administrator accounts, making sure that they're safe and making sure that you're securing them appropriately. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the why, right? So why least privilege? Why do we need to protect these accounts that are on the device? So running as a user with elevated privileges creates this risk that adversaries sort of love, right? If you look out in the wild, you'll see tons of talk about elevating privileges to admin and then ultimately to system. And then that allows attackers to gain that foothold or that persistence on your device. Now, the Intune team has spent quite a bit of time building endpoint privilege management and collaborating with the Microsoft Entra team to make sure that we have Windows LAPs in the place where you can use it to secure those local admin accounts. But before we get deep into that, I want to talk a little bit about the threat. On my screen here, I have just a very simple example of what the endpoint has for security boundaries from the user mode, admin, and system space perspective. This is a rather crude drawing, but I think it'll get the point across. The goal here is for adversaries is to get on your device and then elevate to the system space all the way here on the right. When I'm running as standard user, I put an additional protection boundary in place that adversary would need to escape in order to gain that sort of persistence, right? So if I'm an adversary, the first thing I want to do, if I'm running on that device, I'm running as standard user, so the first thing an adversary is going to do is they're going to get into your user mode space and then they're going to try and escalate up to admin. Now, this is a really important sort of point because if you are not running as standard user, if you're running as admin, that significantly lowers the cost of the attack on your endpoints. So with EPM, what we try to do is we try and build or keep you into that user mode space unless you absolutely need admin, right? Unless your organization has a set of allowed activities that they want to allow you to do as an administrator. Otherwise, you're completely in that user mode space. Once you're an admin, it's rather trivial to load things like drivers, et cetera, because admins have full control of a device to escalate to this system space. So that's really important. And this is the why here, right? If you wanted to learn more on this, there's tons of good sessions online, and our friends at Microsoft and at a few external consultancies have really good information about how these attacks come into your enterprise and how you can prevent them. But as this relates to EPM, let's talk a little bit about the solution and how we can help make sure that you can keep that standard user boundary in place. So EPM is built into Microsoft Intune, and it's part of the Intune suite. It's also available to purchase standalone or as a sort of a standalone license. And what it does is, remember, is it allows you to keep that standard user boundary in place, that initial one that we just talked about, while allowing certain set of approved processes to run as administrator, right? And there's three main pieces to EPM, okay? There's the client-side configuration, which says, hey, I want to allow EPM to be turned on. There's the policy for that client-side configuration, which says, hey, I want EPM to behave this way. Things like default user behavior and making sure the auditing data is set up properly so you can see the elevations that are happening in your enterprise. And lastly, there's the rules that allow you to define what are those small set of apps that are allowed to run as admin, even though the user is a standard user. Now, the fundamental concept that we have in EPM is that of a rule, and this is really important. We link an app binary, a detection, to an elevation action. There's two ways that EPM can trigger a detection. First is that EPM identifies a process that needs to run as admin based on the rules that you've supplied. The second way is that a user selects Run Elevated, and that's a right-click context menu. In that scenario, the end user knows that they need to run this binary as elevated, maybe it's an installer, etc., to be able to complete the transaction or whatever they're trying to complete. From there, what happens is you're linked to one of three elevation actions. We have two that are in market today and one support approved that's in private preview now, and Eric's going to be talking a little bit more about that here on the next segment. To summarize, automatic is an always elevated sort of scenario. If you define an automatic rule for an application or a binary, every time that application or binary launches, it's going to launch elevated. Lastly, user confirmed, which is the other in-market scenario today, allows you to define a rule in a similar fashion, but it will only launch elevated when the user requests it to run elevated. The user will see a certain, UAC-like experience, which asks them to either continue, cancel, or maybe some additional things that you have in place, like requiring them to authenticate again with any of the Windows logon provider or Windows credential providers that are available in the OS platform, as well as provide a justification, allowing you to require an end user provide some sort of justification that's audited, so that way you have some audit trail for the user and why that elevation was required. And lastly, support approved, which Eric's going to talk about here in a second, where an end user can request to run something as elevated. A support professional would approve that, or somebody in your IT staff with the proper role-based access controls. And then that one elevation would be allowed for a given period of time for that user, for that device, and then it's short-lived. And now to talk a little bit more about support approved, let's hand it over to Eric. Eric, let's learn some more about support approved, sir.
All right, thank you, Matt. Great. We'll take it away here, and I'll dig into support approved for y'all. Thank you. Okay, so as Matt already has given a brief overview of support approved, but just to cover what support approved does. So it's designed for scenarios where the user can directly interact with support. Those interactions could be synchronous or asynchronous, depending upon how you set that up as an organization. The elevation itself will be a new default option for you as the Intune admin, or you can create an explicit rule to make the support approved scenario happen. The admin will approve the request in the console, and it'll be a short-lived rule, just like every other EPM rule that you have. So it's not a special type of rule. It really is just like every other EPM rule. Okay, let me first talk about how support approved actually works. So we start off with the user requesting elevation, just as they would normally for other types of EPM rules. And then we have two different cases. Either the administrator has created an explicit rule that is support approved, and so we'll match that rule. Or if there is no explicit rule, but the administrator has configured support approved as the default behavior, we also fall into the same support approved flow. So in that case, our EPM client will submit the request up to the Intune service, where it's routed through our backend system in Intune and ends up showing up in the Intune UX, in the console, where you as the Intune administrator can review the request and approve it if you deem it's appropriate to allow elevation. When that approval happens, a short-lived rule is created and is returned to the client. So this rule follows the exact same policy workflow as every other policy that you created into. There's not a special path for these. It's leveraging the exact same model that we've built for other EPM policies. Now, to be clear, for this particular short-lived rule, it follows the rule of 4 fours, that we're calling it for this feature. So that rule is for a specific device, for a specific user, for a specific period of time, and for a specific binary. So it's those 4 fours, very precise to allow that elevation. So that rule is then delivered back to the client like any other EPM rule, as I've said, and then the user will be notified that their request was approved, and it gives the opportunity for the user to then do the elevation and continue being productive using their application. Now I'll move into an actual demo of Support Approved and give you a sense of what this will look like. So here's the user's desktop. They've downloaded this finance application that was not assigned to them through Intune, but they want to install it. So this is the installer for that application. So the first thing the user will do is right-click on that and choose Run with Elevated Access. So that will kick off the standard EPM flow. So now, in this case, the application is unknown to the administrator, so there's no rule for it. So it's falled back to the default behavior, which in this case is the support approved flow. So in this case, the user will submit this request through this dialog by clicking send, and the request will be sent to Intune. So they will close that. And now we'll flip over to what the Intune administrator will see. So this is going into the EPM UX, going to elevation request. And you can see right here on this line here, finance.exe, that's the request that was just submitted. And just for context, here's another example of an application that was submitted with additional metadata. So the admin sees this one, clicks on finance.exe, and gets more details about the application to see what device it is and what the user is, and again, all the file path and other information they may use to decide if they want to approve it. So in this case, the admin says, yes, this one looks good. So the admin clicks approve. And at that point, now we flip back to the user device. The user will see this pop-up message explaining that the administrator has approved the request. As we described before, this is flowed back through the normal check-in process from the device. It's not a special work stream or some special mechanism by which this rule makes it back. It's the same as every other Intune policy. So this message is now popped up because we recognize that the user had made the request, and we match the request with the new policy and say, this is one that the user explicitly requested. So we pop this message up in Windows. The user says, great, let's go ahead and open up that exe. We get the standard user approved UX, and the user clicks continue, and there is the exe is now running, and it's installing the finance application. All right, so just to kind of summarize what we've shown here with EPM. So this is the support approved scenario, allows you to use EPM for just enough access. It allows you to define rules that allow your organization to granularly allow elevation. With support approval, you can ensure that the scenario always requires support approval for the cases that you as the admin want to do. You can utilize the new support approved scenario for these one-time transactions during support interactions. And we're looking to bring this to you in the first quarter of 2024. We are hitting private preview just as we're recording this in the fall. So we're excited to get this to you. And then looking forward, we are also looking for ways to allow for non-Intune admins like the employee's manager to participate in the same approval process. We have lots of interesting scenarios for this that we're looking ahead. All right, and thank you. That's it for support approved workflow in EPM. I hope that answered some questions for you. I'd like to hand it on now to Laura to talk about the Windows local admin password solution. Take it away, Laura.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, let's dive into it. So from the very beginning of time, every single Windows device has been built in with a local administrator account. Every device is required to have it. It can't be deleted. It's a member of the administrators group on the device, which means that it has access to pretty much everything on the device. Now, if the device is compromised, the attacker has access to the local admin password, which means, again, everything on the device, which makes this extremely appealing to attempted vulnerability attacks. So this leaves organizations absolutely no choice but to ensure that the local admin account is correctly secured and continuously protected to prevent it from getting compromised. Otherwise, the implications could be pretty detrimental. Now, local accounts are not only important in the context of security protection, but having access to the local admin account is really useful for help desk scenarios if you're trying to do remote diagnosis or perform tasks only the local account can do, like rejoining devices to the domain or the Entra tenant. So the goal of LAPS, which is the local admin password solution, is to facilitate the management, security, and storing of the local admin password by rotating the randomized passwords. Then allow admins to retrieve the password if they need it for one of the scenarios that I'd mentioned. Now, the old way of doing things was through an on-prem product known now as Legacy LAPS, which did the storage and rotation of the local admin password through the Microsoft directory. But a major limitation in this was that it did not meet customers where they are in the journey to the cloud. So that's where the brand new and shiny Windows Labs feature comes in, which is meant to unblock the thousands of enterprises who have listed this as a top adoption blocker to the cloud and provide you a built-in Labs solution to store and secure the local admin password using Entra. Now, Windows Labs is natively built into the Windows OS, which means that there's no separate MSI to download or client that you need to deploy, and any updates or fixes are supported through the Windows servicing channels, which folks are already using, so that's pretty awesome. We have support for both cloud, hybrid, and on-prem scenarios, so you can choose where you want to store and encrypt the passwords through Entra or continue to use the on-prem directory. Labs configurations can be done via GPO or MDM, where we have parity with what exists on legacy Labs, plus the additional setting options that we've added. And IT admins that are using Intune have first-class management experiences specifically for Labs, which includes scenario-based policy configuration, the ability to view and retrieve the local admin password for a given device, the ability to manually rotate the local admin password for a given device if you want to do this outside of the scheduled rotation, and gating all of these actions using our built-in RBAC roles and specific custom permissions that you can use. We also bring you auditing events, policy reporting, so there's a whole new set of capabilities that you didn't have before. We've made it super easy to migrate from the legacy Labs product to Windows Labs, which will be deprecated in the future. But if legacy Labs is configured, then that will continue to be supported. But if the MDM version is recognized, then that will take precedence on the client. So who can use it? We've made this available to pretty much all of the in-market versions of Windows. So for Windows 10, 11 later, and also Windows Server 2019 and later. Note that we do not support workplace joined devices, but that's captured in our amazing documentation. So go take a look at that for the specific versions that are available. And on licensing, the point that I want to hit home here is that there's not a specific premium license that is required for Labs. Pretty much the base licenses for Windows, Intune, and Entra should get you going. So again, I encourage everyone to go and check out lots of documentation and resources that we have on the details for the feature. We just launched GA, so it's super exciting to have this available for everyone. Now I'll walk you through the first-class management experience for Windows Labs through Microsoft Intune. As you can see, I'm in the Intune console, and I've navigated to the Endpoint Security Blade, at which point I can come to the Account Protection section and start to create a new policy specifically for Windows Labs. So I can select Windows as the platform, then I have the Windows Labs policy template ready for me to start configuring. When I go ahead and hit Create, I can enter the name of this policy. So let's put technical kickoff Labs, awesome. And when I go ahead and hit Next, I can start to see the options of settings that I have available to configure. So first off, I can select where I want to back up the password to. I have different options. By default, disabling this won't be backed up. But then I also have the option to do this through the cloud or maintain this to be on-prem. Once I select, let's say, the on-prem version, this will inform the settings that I have available to be configured in this instance. What's super cool is that through all of the settings, I have tooltip information that'll tell me specifically what options I have, what it'll do, and also a link to the CSP documentation, which will give me more detailed information on how these settings behave. But coming back here, you can see I have the set of settings available. This will actually mirror the settings that we had in Legacy Labs, so no changes from there. But we also have the option now, obviously, to configure this through the cloud, and that'll also inform the settings that I have to configure. So I can choose the password type information, how long this will be managed for. There's some defaults in there. I can configure things around password complexity, password length, and we've also added a couple of other options related to post-authentication actions, which will specify the action to take after the password expires and the amount of time to wait after auth before executing that action. So giving you some good stuff in the new Windows Labs here. I can specify the account name that I would want to rotate the password for. If I don't enter anything, this will just be the default built-in admin account, or I can enter like a flat name, let's say Laura or the SID, to say what I want to target. Once I'm good with all my configurations, I can go ahead and hit next and run through the common workflow for configuring any policy in Intune. So I can select the scope tags if I like. I can choose my assignments. So if I want to specify the groups that I have in my tenant, I can go ahead and select those. If I want to do all users, all devices, I got options. So I can go ahead and hit all devices, hit next, and then review what I have in this configuration. When I go ahead and hit create, you can see the policies there, and I can start to manage that policy if I wanted to make any edits, make any assignment changes, and then also review any reporting based on how the devices are checking in to receive those settings. Now, when I come to a specific device in my all devices list, I can take a look at the local admin password information, as well as have some additional experiences through Intune. So for this specific device, given I'm an admin with the right permissions, I have the option to do a manual rotation of the local admin password on this device. So you can see here, once I select, it'll tell me this is outside of the scheduled rotation, but I can go ahead and hit yes to rotate, and that'll initiate the action to take with some status that is presented to me on the actions page. If I want to go ahead and look at the more detailed local admin password information for this device, given I'm an admin with the right permissions, I can go ahead and take a look at things like when the password was last rotated, when the next one is scheduled, the SID and account name of the device, and also I can retrieve the password itself and copy that to my clipboard and go ahead and use it in whatever scenario that I need this for. So this specific experience is available through Intune as well as Entra if I'm looking at the device object. So in either place, I can have the option to take a look at this. So that's a run through of the Intune management experience for configuring Windows Labs. And you can see that we have some really awesome improvements to enable this in the cloud.
Thank you, Laura. I hope that you all learned a little bit today about the tools that we have at Microsoft to help you give just enough access to your end users if you need to allow them to elevate and secure those, pesky built-in admin accounts, that making sure that you can randomize the passwords and making sure those things are secure to prevent sort of lateral movement across your environment. That's all from me. Eric, Laura, anything from you all?
No, I just want to thank everybody. I hope you learned some good stuff, and we're looking forward to you being even better and bigger Intune customers in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Appreciate the time.